Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Mann at the Safe Kids Now show. And I would like to announce that we have a new newsletter on youth and neighborhood safety and you can join us at safekidsnow.com if you would like a copy of our newsletter. Just go to the contact page. So we have an amazing guest today that has been involved for 40 years in the work she's been doing. And her name is Susan O'Million, and she's an attorney, an award-winning author, a motivational speaker, a recognized national expert who has advocated to end violence against women for the past 40 years. So she's also been litigating, sex discrimination cases for those many years. And with the death of her 19-year-old niece, who was shot and killed by her ex-boyfriend, Susan's work became even more personal. So I'm so happy to have her join us today and talk to us about a very important topic, which has to do with battered women and how to protect yourself, how to protect your family. And welcome, Susan. So glad to have you come and join us today. Thank you.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm so pleased to be here.
Well, let's start off by talking about, now I know this happened a number of years ago, but it was really part of your motivation for getting involved and getting committed to working on violence against women. And that had to do with the death of your niece. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
So yeah, this happened 20 years ago in 1999. Actually, it's October. She was killed October 17th. She was a college student. She was in a very good college in the Midwest in Michigan, where I was born and raised. And she had a boyfriend. Maggie was very bright. She was very beautiful. She was very talented, athletic. She knew about abuse, but as many women that I've worked with have talked about, is sometimes you miss some of the warning signs. And I think the major warning sign that wasn't there was that he'd never physically assaulted her before he killed her. So there were other signs. Maggie didn't have quite the words for this. Is 20 years ago. We weren't using the word coercive control then, which is a new word that's sort of not a new concept, but a new word for it. A little bit more descriptive of that manipulation. He manipulated her even after she didn't want to be with him. So whatever happened in that room that night, she went to see him one more time, I think, to ask him to leave her alone. And she didn't know he had a gun. So he killed her and killed himself. Now, I had been doing this work before Maggie was killed, but I had not done it as a survivor. I'm not personally a survivor of domestic violence or sexual assault. I've done both sexual assault and domestic violence. As an attorney, I used to represent women in court for divorces and domestic violence cases, and I used to be in court with sexual assault victims for their criminal cases, But I had never gotten this close, and I was also not in tune with what it was like to be a survivor of a homicide and how you feel like the guilt and the sense that I should have done something, I should have known. I had all this information, but as a family, we knew that she had left him and that she was safe, and she was living in a very safe campus, so to speak, at least from the outside. So I decided that I wanted to go back to this work, but I couldn't go back. Emotionally, I couldn't go back to crisis intervention. Every woman in the shelter was Maggie, and emotionally, I just couldn't do that. So I decided to do something different, and mostly trying to find a space where I could find a way to avenge what happened to her, because in the traditional sense of revenge or getting this person who would hurt somebody, prosecuted and put in jail, that wasn't going to happen because he killed himself. So I really had to find my revenge or a way to avenge what happened to her. And this is really where my work has taken me. As you mentioned in the introduction, it's much more personal, much more immediate, and it has really transformed not only the women I work with's lives, but my own life.
Oh my goodness. You mentioned that I guess he wasn't physically abusive toward her. And so what kind of signs did she miss that, because I think that's what most of us think, that, you slap them or you hit them or you bruise them in some way.
Oh yeah, if he would have slapped or hit Maggie, she would have known in a minute. I think it was more about emotional abuse. Some people call it psychological abuse. The clearest warning sign she well, I wouldn't say she missed it, but it was a clear warning sign. Was the lack of ability, the refusal. Thank you. I'm thinking of a word. The refusal to accept the end of the relationship. He refused to accept the end of the relationship. He was also pushing the relationship too far, too fast, which is one of the reasons why she broke up with him, was because she was only a junior she was a sophomore. He was a junior in college. And it's like, I don't want to get married. I don't want to, and he had a little more traditional view of how women were supposed to be. I wouldn't use the word submissive because I didn't know him well enough to know that, but that is sort of the general sense that she was going to be in a more traditional form. And Maggie, I think, wanted to go to law school. We had talked about this when she was a very young child. So she had not that she didn't want to have a family, have kids and a family and a husband and the whole thing, but she was going to be a career person. So I think that was one of the things she missed, that he was. And then I think, like I said before, she missed the coercive control, the manipulation. He manipulated her to come to that room one more time to see him. And she didn't know he had a gun. So the idea that there was something there, if I can't have you, no one else can. There was lots of stuff going on that he was not telling her about. And my niece thought she could go and talk him down because she was really good at that.
Yeah.
So those are the warning signs of, yeah.
There's so many ways of people to get out of focus and get manipulated. As a matter of fact, my daughter was stalked when she was in college. Yep. And she even got so nervous about the whole thing, she actually came home and quit college. And don't you know, he followed her home. So the way we stopped it at that point, because this was not, I didn't know what to do, but I did call up his parents and I let them know what was going on. And I did call the authorities, and that was the end of it. But it was scary. It was scary. And I think a lot of parents, what would you say is the first sign that parents should be aware of?
Well, I always tell parents about college itself. I don't think parents do enough, what's the word, investigation, I guess. Most kids who are in college, they're usually in their first or one of their few relationships. So there was never any indication that there was any education on Maggie's college campus, which was a very good school. But there was any information about the warning signs. There was no regular groups or regular education. There's much more today. And there's much more information out there, not only in the college, but on the internet. But it's still really hard to confront that yourself. Maybe I'm just, maybe he's just, so in that thing that girls have, well, if he's paying so much attention to me, then he must really love me. Well, he's also checking every moment where you are and checking your cell phone and where you were and who you're with. And so those are not signs of affection. There's definitely a line there. And then it moves into obsession, possession kind of stuff. So, and this is how many men are socialized in our society. This is how relationships should go. I remember one of the things I did after Maggie was killed, not only working with women, I started doing some groups with men who were arrested for domestic violence. And some of them today, they would come in and say something to me, like in their group, they had been arrested and they were sent to an education group, well, I don't understand why she wouldn't submit to me that night, I'm like, you use the word submit, what century are you in? And even the guys were like, oh boy, that's, so there's really this, not understanding about relationships and how they work. And for a lot of women, I think, like Maggie, they were trying to be helpful, trying to be kind, trying to understand, but not understanding that some of this behavior is off the charts, let's say.
Yeah.
and maybe a personality defect, not necessarily a behavioral change. That would, so it'd be nice to have him, have men or people like this not be so manipulative, but may not be something that can change. Certainly not in a relationship. So
Well,
those kind of warning signs, yeah.
how do you think we can do a better job of educating men about this kind of problem? Because I just read that 10 women a minute are abused in this country in some way, verbally, sexually. I mean, this is off the chart and it's costing billions of dollars. So how can we educate men and women more effectively?
Well, I think that's education may not be the word. It could be that there be a moment when they get information at school or, like I said, on a college campus. I think it's also enforcing that as a code. This is the code. This is how, in this environment, in this community, this is how men and women are going to interact and respect each other. I think for when I was doing domestic violence offender groups for about 15 years, so I was doing them every week. So I saw a lot of young men, and usually younger men, because they were men who were arrested for first time offenses. If you ask them what their childhood was like, they would mostly tell you, not everyone, that they grew up witnessing domestic violence, or they were witnessing and also were abused themselves. So when you ask them if they had a role model, a male role model of who they could see now or could imagine be a good father, a good partner, a good husband, they didn't have a lot of male role models. They had a lot of male role models that went the other way, particularly older brothers or fathers or stepfathers. So even grounding them in what it looks like, what would it look like to have a healthy relationship, was really kind of behind that. And then there are some men who just insist that these are the roles that men and women are going to perform. And if they don't comply, then either they're going to pay the consequences, however they do it. And these roles may be enforced by your family, by your culture, by your religion, by your neighborhood. Who knows? And, I used to have men who would come from other countries and say, well, in my country, you can hit a child, spank them all you want, you won't go. That's not child abuse. Well, in our country, it is. And so just that idea that, and that reinforces that, it's okay. Or this is the way I'm going to live my life. But so we have a lot of work in how we socialize men and women into roles. We still socialize men and women into some roles that are not necessarily bad roles to play, like, wife and mother, husband and father, provider and nurturer. But we're still kind of in some rigidity about how those are divided in sex categories. But even if they're not, the rigidity is the problem. So anybody who steps outside of that, and then the dynamic of, have you been taught communication skills? Have you been able to, do you really care about this person enough, or do you care more about yourself? And I don't know. I don't know the answer to it. I spent 15 years doing some behavioral modification, but I felt for a lot of these guys, they also had incredible trauma histories that they brought to the table, and that were not being treated and not being recognized. And for some of them, particularly men, to talk about their feelings and what was going on. Men are allowed to express one feeling externally in our society still, and that's anger. If men show hurt or sadness, it's kind of like, you see a real man. And that's kind of sad, because you should be able to have that full range. And I think men are changing. I think there's some perception of that, particularly the younger men. They're asking for, they're demanding more to have a fuller life, but it's still pretty stereotypical out there.
I worked with the homeless for 5 years in my particular profession. And we started support groups for men. And this was in Oakland, California. And I heard and learned the same things you're talking about. They came from very dysfunctional families. There wasn't a father in the home. And they bragged about how they treated women. They even bragged about, having sex with one or two or three women. And
Or
we
having
seem
children with many women. Yeah.
exactly, and we seem to be promoting that today as a lifestyle choice, because I'm seeing it in the movies, the music. Kids, young people are influenced by all of those things. Television, porn is a huge problem in this society, and it's the biggest money
Right.
maker
And
there is.
right. And most pornography is not erotic. It's violence against women. That's actually the definition of pornography. Is it's images that show violence against women. And yeah, it's fair. And you can it's on the website. You can find it in the deep web. You can find it all over the place. Yeah, in the dark
Right.
web. Yeah.
Okay, now, how do we, as a society, really dig into this and really work to change it? I know a lot of women are involved in a lot of different groups. A lot of times they're not communicating with each other, and they're doing a lot of the same things. I think there needs to be some networks, more networks put together, especially for women that have been violated. What do you think about that?
Well, the network I've been working on, the community that I've been working on since Maggie's death, and remember that transformational moment for me when my work moved to a different place. The same kind of work and the same community that I was working in, with the exception of the work I had done with men. I have created a thriver community through my work. So I believe that for many of us, and I certainly didn't understand this when Maggie was killed, was that we're on a journey, and for whatever happens to us, in my case it was this really horrendous murder that I don't know why I thought my family was the other, that it would never be touched, but it goes across all ages and all races and all historical nationalities, locations. But it's the idea that we're on a journey, that there will probably be some kind of a struggle, some victimization that you're going to experience. And there also could be, and there should be, and there will be a moment of transformation when you move from victim to survivor. So I wanted to not be stuck in victim about what happened to my niece, because usually in victim there's a lot of anger. And the last thing he's going to get out of all this, the man who killed my niece, was that I'm going to get stuck in my anger my whole life. I want to move on. And I think we haven't done enough to help women move through it, because if they don't, they're going to go back. And not because they're stupid and they don't understand it or whatever, but because it's where they're going to end up, either emotionally, because they don't have any other range of emotions about this and how they interact with people, or it's going to be socially. They don't know people that are outside of that kind of atmosphere. And financially, most women stay in abusive relationships because they don't have the money to get out. I mean, it's not even like I want to stay and be abused. It's like I can, particularly in a relationship where he controls all the money and the credit cards and whatever else. How do you get out? And you've got a couple of kids and you don't have a job. Maybe you have a job, but it's not a great job. Maybe you haven't got a great car. So we really haven't, we haven't created a community idea, a societal idea that you can move on from this. And there is a way to, as I call it, victim to survivor to thriver, a process of doing that. Women who I've worked with over the last 20 years have come through my workshop program. I have a 2-day workshop that's free of charge, now virtual. If they come through my program, I get them motivated again to start moving. They motivate themselves. They don't go back to relationships like that. They begin to break that cycle. And for many of the men I talked about that had gone through my classes in the offender program, they also started getting the idea about, I want to break that cycle. This has been going on in my family since my grandparents and my father. I want to break that cycle for my kids. And I don't know that we put enough resources and enough focus on that part. Yes, getting them out. And that's always been the goal of the domestic violence movement. From the very beginning that I started working in the early 70s, or the 70s, 1980s, get women out, getting them past the crisis of sexual assault, but to also help them move on. It's not an overnight switch, but it is a process and it is a journey, and they can take that journey and they will not go back. Once they have that sense of themselves, and they may not have had that sense of themselves because they've had multiple traumas. A lot of the women I work with, their presenting problem may be domestic violence and sexual assault, but if you ask a couple of questions, They will talk about child abuse, child sexual assault,
Mhm.
incest. They'll talk about, yeah, in high school this happened, or I had a job where I was sexually harassed. So we're piling trauma on top of trauma, and then expecting people to somehow rise above all that all by themselves without a panoply of services around them. So really trying to get people moving, and not just women, but women and men, but men have a little harder time with it because society isn't really interested in their journey so much, and many of them get stuck in a place. And that's also very sad. But the process of, we are all on a journey. So the question is, let's go to the next step. And how do you get resources to sort of move around that? That's something that I'm really interested now in working on a national level to really begin to
Good.
push that. Yes, we need to do more work to keep women from not getting in these situations, working with kids and
Mhm.
particularly adolescents, but also moving women who, if I can get a woman who's been abused maybe when she's 30, starting to move again rather than meeting her when she's 60 and she's got 30 years in there that she's kind of floundering. And I have women who tell me that, I wish I would have met you 20 years ago because you really could have helped me move faster. And I think they have a longing to move out of this, but they don't know how to do it. So that's really the other piece. So that to me is what as I understand in the public health world, is a different kind of prevention. You're preventing them from going back or from helping them break that cycle. Primary prevention is getting them to not go into those relationships. That part would have helped Maggie a lot to
Yeah.
understand more about the warning signs. Or the other thing I want to say real quick about
Well,
Maggie.
before you do that,
Yeah,
let's leave that as a cliffhanger because we need to take a little break.
Oh, great.
When we come back, we're going to talk to Susan O'Million. I got it right. About this journey that we should be taking with men and women to help them understand more about violence, domestic violence. So we'll be back in 1 minute.
You're listening to All About Us Radio. We're live streaming 24/7, playing old school versus new school. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at AAU Media, and visit our website www.aaumedia.com. Call us at 1-833-369-1444, extension 1, and leave us an inspirational message or request. You're listening to All About Us Radio.
Throw and Tuck. It's handmade by myself, and you only can get it here, and it's patent, and it's only here at Rococo Design. It's like a regular pillow, or you can take the blanket out like so, fluff up the pillow, open up your blanket, wrap it around yourself, and then you can lay on your sofa and relax with your pillow throw and tuck. When you're done with it, just flip it over. When you don't want the blanket anymore, you just fold it over twice. Fold it over twice again. Fold it over. And tuck it in the back. And there you go. You're back to the pillow throw and tuck. Rococo Design.
Okay, we're back and we're talking to Susan O'Million, and she's an attorney and award-winning author, a motivational speaker, and a recognized national expert on ending domestic or violence against women. And she's been doing this work for the past 40 years. So let's continue with our conversation, Susan. And maybe you could tell us also a little bit about your series that you have. Go ahead.
So yes, so I have books, and I do a workshop. It's called My Avenging Angel Workshops. That's really where I got the idea after Maggie was killed as the kind of work I wanted to do. Remember, I said earlier that I wanted to have revenge or to avenge what happened to her, but
Right.
he killed himself So I didn't have the usual way to go to take him to court and prosecute him and put him in jail so he doesn't hurt anybody else. So I got this quote, living well is the best revenge. And I thought, well, first of all, that's what I want to do. I don't want to get stuck in my anger, but I put together a series of workshops, a 2-day workshop that I've been doing for about 20 years now. And that's where the women come. It's free and it's now virtual in COVID time. So it's been kind of exciting. And it really, it's a motivational model to start them moving through that they can see their journey, which we were talking about earlier, victim to survivor to thriver, to start getting the negative voice in their head that's been pushed on them. Well, it's something we always had since we're kids, but somehow abusers know how to get into your inner critic and just really feed that. You're not smart enough. You won't make it without me. You got to stay with me. So to get that to quiet down, bring up the happy person inside, the part of you that's been untouched, and begin to start setting new goals for yourself and start moving forward. So that's really that movement from victim to survivor to thriver. What's your thriver's success story? Go back to school, get a better job, start your own business, start singing again. Just begin to really open up. And the women I've worked with over the years have done amazing things in that way. So the idea that's the journey that we're on is what I put together in the workshops. I'm not a clinician, I'm not a social worker, but this came to be somewhat naturally. It's a natural process, but I think some of us, particularly when we've gone through abuse, gets kind of stuck. That negative voice is too loud. I'll never move my life forward. The goals are too crazy. I'll never get there. And then suddenly we start to unravel that. And so from those workshops, the material I've begun to develop, I put into 3 books. It's called the Thriver Zone series. And I had 7 steps to thriving. That's in my first book. And then I've also got the motivational model, trying to help women to manifest a life of power and purpose. And then finally, the last book called Living in the Thriver Zone. So it's entering the Thriver Zone, staying in the Thriver Zone, living in the Thriver Zone, is 7 women from my workshop talking about what their journey has been like. I think it's important for women to hear it from other women, because I can tell you what I do, but the women can show you how they've been able to not only do something they thought they couldn't do in terms of a goal, but just change the way they saw themselves. And sometimes when they walk into the workshop and, I stay in touch with these women, I have a follow-up group. They look so different from the day they walked in until, because their whole persona changes. And that's the work I think we need to do. So I've been putting that together. Now I'm beginning to look at, I have many people in the industry working with domestic violence and sexual assault, people who are saying, no, that's a piece that's missing from our program. Could you come and train us about what you do? So that's really what I'm starting to do. And starting to realize that there's a lot more interest in healing, I think, these days. Maybe it's from COVID, I don't know, but people are more recognizing that there's a process in which you can heal, that you don't have to get stuck where you are, and that there is support and there is a method to it. Is probably the way I would describe it.
One of the things that is seldom talked about is how does violence toward the wife or violence toward the husband affect the children? Because this has a dramatic effect on them. And let me get some ideas from you on how do we deal with that one?
Well, that's a good question. Like I said, when I was doing offender group, I asked the guys, they would tell me, in fact, I did the curriculum piece for them in the group about the impact of domestic violence on children, they would start talking about not so much the impact on their children, but they would talk about the impact on them as children. And they were pretty clear about it. I think, first of all, to recognize this is where it happens, that there's a statistic out there. I don't know if it's based on real data, but it certainly makes sense in terms of what we were talking about before, in terms of role modeling, that if you experience domestic violence in your youth or when you're younger, or see it, displayed in lots of parts of your family as you're growing up, you're more likely to be either a victim or a perpetrator yourself.
Absolutely.
It makes perfect sense. And that certainly has played out not only in the men that I've worked with as offenders, but also in the women as victims. So to break that cycle, once again, talking about breaking that cycle of violence and what are the supports around you to do that. One of the things I wanted to say before about my niece's case sort of also comes around here is that we haven't educated enough of the system players about what this cycle is about and what the dynamics of domestic violence. I don't think there was very few people on my niece's college campus, who understood what was going on because she wasn't being physically beaten. I think her perception, although I don't know, was that the campus police wouldn't do anything because she had no bruises. And as we all know, that's only one sign. So there's a lot more education. I think police officers, we certainly saw that in the recent case with Gabby Petito, the woman who was killed out in Utah eventually by her boyfriend. But the police stopped that couple that one night, and the police didn't get the warning signs. And she was she wasn't stating them really clearly, perhaps, but her actions and behaviors certainly could have, not only hers but also his. So police officers, judges who take these cases and hear these cases, not only on domestic violence, sexual assault, social workers certainly tuned into it, but it's still amazing to me. Sometimes probation officers, I worked with a lot of probation officers. So the idea that we need to, and not just talking about domestic violence as such, but trauma itself, understanding trauma and how it affects people. And then as children, trauma affecting children, as you just said, witnessing violence when you're a child and being traumatized as a child, how does that carry forward? Not an excuse for the behavior, but an understanding of the behavior.
This is a very important topic, and I really appreciate your sharing your time with us today to help people understand more about domestic violence. When I watched that video with Gabby Petito, I thought it was pretty obvious just looking at her that when they did that interview and showed it on television, she looked like a victim. And I think our police officers and the people that work with parents and children, and we need to have a better understanding how people react when they have been victimized. And they also, a lot of people don't understand why she, and victims do this, try to protect their abuser. Why would you say they're protecting their abuser?
Well, they're caught in the cycle. And, I remember years ago when police wouldn't arrest, the women would always say to me, if I get him arrested and he comes home, because no one's going to do anything about it, he's going to beat me even harder, So their calculation of their safety is in their estimation, not mine. The same reason why, I can't say, well, why didn't you leave? Why didn't you do so-and-so? Because you don't know that. And why didn't Gabby, just call her mom up and say, come get me, mom. This is crazy. I can't do this anymore. That calculation is really, it's very personal and it's very individual, and it's a trauma response. How are you? It's almost like, what do they call the fight, flight, or freeze? It's a very personalized decision that you make. And it may not even be a decision. It may be, an instinct. If I go do this, it's more dangerous to me if I go do that.
Kind of a survival instinct.
Yes.
In her own way. Well, any final thing you would like to add?
Well, I just would like to invite people, if they know somebody who might be interested in the work I do. As I said, I'm now doing the workshops virtually. So if you go to either thriverzone.com, which is a website that's up there, but also myavengingangel.com. I do have workshops coming up this fall and also coming in March and April, in February and March. So yeah, just trying to get involved, think about and look for resources. One of the things I always tell people is if you know somebody, you may not feel comfortable and maybe it's not a good idea to intervene, but knowing the resources that are available in your community and which are usually free, and being a person that will be a resource for that person is really important. You can save a life. There's no question about it.
Well, we're going to end with a comment by Rebecca Kimball, and she says, "You are so right. Building one's strength, concentrating on your own talents and successes can reduce the feeling of inadequacy and fear." Mm-hmm. So thank you so much, Susan, for sharing your message and the workshops that you are doing to help empower women and men. So we look forward to learning more in the future. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Well, I am so glad you had an opportunity to listen to what Susan had to say. And because we've got a huge problem and it is affecting our children. And when people have children and they keep having this trauma in their lives, we're going to see this problem continue to escalate. And we do need to focus on how do you break the cycle. So thank you for joining us. And next week, we have a wonderful gentleman that's going to join us. And we're going to be talking about a subject that is totally different. And his name is Mike Tikanian. And we're going to talk about some of the issues that affect children. So we look forward to having you join us next week. And these videos are recorded and they're available on YouTube. And then you go into YouTube and in the search bar, put in AAU Media, and you can find any of our interviews. So we'll see you next week. Thank you for joining us. And I might add that we are at safekidsnow.com. So look us up and join us and join our newsletter. Thank you.
You're listening to All About Us Radio. We're live streaming 24/7, playing old school versus new school. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at AAU Media, and visit our website www.aaumedia.com. Call us at 1-833-369-1444, extension 1, and leave us an inspirational message or request. You're listening to All About Us Radio.